And we are resuming. I believe we have a couple of items that we need to pick up from before our break. Is that correct?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That is correct. If it hasn't been distributed already, we do have the reserve continuity schedule for you, as well as a listing of carry forward capital projects. Perhaps we could just have those distributed, and then if you'd like, we can provide just a little bit of an overview of what's in that information, and we can discuss it to the degree that you wish today, or you may also wish to take the information. There's a fair amount of it, to take it away and reflect on it, and we could sort of address any additional questions you might have on Monday as well. And I would also just remind committee members for tomorrow and Friday, in advance of Monday's meeting, if there's anything that's come out of these 2 days or the information we're handing out to you today, and if we can be of assistance in the interim, we will make whatever time is necessary to help individual members of council out as well.
Thank you very much. Now, do you anticipate that we have enough time on Monday to complete our task at hand, or do we have more than we need? I'm just trying to balance out today.
Certainly that depends on the nature of the additional deliberations you wish to have, but we, from the perspective of going through the budget material, you're almost complete now in going through the entire budget material. So from my perspective, I think you're in a really good position Monday to receive the additional information that committee's asked for. We can discuss that. That can be incorporated into your perhaps final deliberations, and I suspect that you'll be in a very good position for decision making on Monday. That's what I would believe.
Very good. And I have three addendums here now. One is uncommitted reserves and reserve fund balances. I have open capital projects, and I have 2019 business plan and budget deliberations public input that we have received. So I'm looking for suggestions on how we can address each one of these, whether it's today or some of these items that we have just received. It would appear would need to be a little longer than this week.
Madam Mayor, perhaps if it's okay with you, I'll just give a little bit of an overview of what's in each of these documents, just so that there's a consistent understanding, and I would also perhaps defer to the Manager of Development, Finance and Capital, just to speak to a couple of the items as well that might help you as you're looking through the list. So the first document I'll speak to is the public input received. So this is basically all input we've received so far through our various venues. The majority of it, I believe, is through the online submissions through the website, and certainly I would encourage budget members to go through it, and you'll see a variety of pieces of input here. From my perspective, a lot of it relating to residents' interest in particular areas of program and so on, and so that's something you'll just want to be aware of and consider as you go into Monday's meeting. And what I can also advise is if there is any additional input received between now and Monday, we will provide that on Monday morning, so that you'll have the very latest information to assist you in your deliberations come Monday. So I don't know that it's helpful necessarily to go through it now, or maybe to leave it with budget committee members to go through, but certainly we're at the will of budget committee, whatever you prefer.
Mr. Lamanna?
Through you, Madam Mayor, my suggestion would be, so that in keeping with open and transparency, that certainly these folks that took the time to provide public input, that my office go through the handout in terms of privacy, and if it's budget committee's will, I would suggest to publish it on today's agenda. We can go back, and then that you would just simply have a motion to receive the public input as of today.
Thank you. And then perhaps on Monday, we would be able to speak to specifics of it. Okay, very good. Want to do it now? Sure. Okay. So I have a motion to receive. Councillor Persuccini, all those in favor? And that's carried.
Madam Mayor, if I can, the second one I'd like to go through is what we refer to as the open capital projects. And that list is provided to you because there's a fairly extensive number of capital projects that you've already gone through in terms of new projects for 2019. But I think that it's very important in that context to understand which projects continue to be outstanding that were approved in prior years and that are in some various forms of completion or various stages of completion. And so certainly this is something that we could walk through briefly if you like, or we could leave with you to see if there's any questions. The one thing that I do want to mention on this is, in particular in the development services area, there's a number of projects that are have been around there for a number of years. We've got a new general manager in that's just started in 2019, and I think Mr. Ramuno and ourselves would like a little bit of an opportunity just to go through those and to maybe reassess those, rescope them. It may even be update budget figures, and then, if appropriate, perhaps come back for approval on those and with a fresh start. Because you can see, if you look at the page 3 of 3, that's where those show at the top of page 3 of 3. There's some projects on there going back to 2011. So those are several years, and so I think it's appropriate to for us to refresh those, and we'll work with the general manager to do that.
Would you suggest that we go through these now, and that one section with our new general manager leave until Monday, but the remainder that we have an opportunity now to bring council up to speed? Mr. Webster.
I think some of them are significant enough that we would propose now that they be, for discussion purposes, what it would mean, we would actually close these. The funds would not be committed, and we would rebudget new capital projects for this council to approve with this timeline, with the scope of works that they understand. And so maybe if we go, I wouldn't mind actually going through these to an extent. It is a working session on deliberations, and so we could either start with this one, or you could start at the very beginning. It depends what council prefers.
I think we start with this one. It's in front of us, and I know from myself, and I probably feel the same way as other members of council, we're aware over the years of projects that have been approved in budget, and we come back to staff and say, well, it's been approved, and so you tell the public that, well, it's been approved, and well, it didn't happen this year, but may be happening next year, and then you forget about it. And then you have the public come back to you and say, well, you told us or me that this in fact was approved in the budget. So I think particularly for new members of council, it will be important to have a little bit of understanding on what the project is and why it's still sitting. Obviously, if it was an easy one to do, it would have happened in the year that it happened. So there has to be some mitigating circumstances why it's back to 2011 or 2012 and still the project hasn't moved forward for a variety of reasons. So this, I think, would be very good time spent now in going through this, and so everyone understands what has been committed. And Mr. Valchek, the idea that perhaps they're not committed anymore, and we start again with a new slate for Monday with those that are going to be moving forward, and the funds will be released to go back into the coffers for other projects.
So on that note, if we may, if we're going to start with development services, Madam Mayor. And so we're still in transition. I believe I would like to ask Mr. Ramuno. he's, I guess, about 12th day on the job now, and I don't know if it's necessarily fair, so, but, and Mr. Velchich does have some knowledge of this area as well from his past 4 months as interim, but maybe I could start off with the heritage property inventory review. It's $100,000 was budgeted last year, 0 was spent. And there's a new project this year called Heritage, I believe it's a list review and investigation of districts for $25,000. What we'd suggest is this $100,000 not be closed at this time, and that we look at the scope of the $25,000 project with some more specific deliverables and make sure we've got the right amount in that area. This is not a tax levy funded initiative, so we're hopeful that would be something we could bring back on Monday.
Questions? Councillor Crothers.
Thank you. My question is an overall question, just trying to understand this document that's before us. So this is money that has been approved in previous budgets, and the majority of it unspent. So the $20 million on the first page, where is that money now?
Madam Mayor, the money would stay in reserves until it's actually expended. And so when we do our year-end financial statements, our audited financial statements, you would see that money continuing to sit in reserve until it's actually utilized.
Okay, so when we then look at the reserves that we have, some of this is committed, and this is just put on our desk, so I don't know if there's a line on there that shows that, but is it showing on here, is it $20 million on here somewhere that I could see it?
Madam Mayor, for purposes of the reserve continuity schedule, which we'll speak about after we go through the council's aware of not just what's the balance sitting in the bank account, but how much has been approved and committed that's not yet been expended, so that you know what is the net balance that you actually have available to work with.
Okay, and so again, just so I can understand this as we go through it, when there is a project that's on this as well as in the 2019 capital budget, that's additional funds. For instance, the Queensville Park redevelopment, there was $300,000 approved in 2017. Now you're asking for another $700,000, and this is just for phase one. So phase one is $1 million. Is that correct? Am I reading that right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Not seeing any, we'll move through it, and I'm sure it'll be much clearer as we start to get some more detail.
If I may, the next one is a dated project and initially approved in 2014. And the thoughts at that time were, at a point in time, our official plan was adopted in 2010, and it was a requirement that official plans be updated every 5 years. And what I can tell you is all official plans that were adopted in 2010 have not been updated at this point, because we've been waiting for new growth plans, there's been servicing issues, and at this point in time, comprehensive review. And what will advise and instruct that process is the legislation introduced, or proposed legislation introduced yesterday in the new growth plan. And so what we're proposing, again, is that this $300,000 be returned to the reserve as an uncommitted, and that we rebudget in a new capital project for this year a more modest amount that we would like to probably see. And I would suggest something maybe in the neighborhood of a third, but we'll advise further on Monday, that would allow us to participate, potentially seek external expertise and assistance in these, moving forward, these MCR reviews. My advisements from colleagues are, rather than wait for the province and the region to be part of the discussion rather than be receiving direction. The third project, Urban Design Guidelines, I believe is largely finished, and I think we just have to true up the percent spent there. But I think there's an implementation that goes for this year, so that's one that did occur, and there is a small balance left to be spent. This project approved in 2012. At this time, it was before the Green Lane secondary plan was moving along. There was a notion at that time of servicing. I believe it's around when NGR made their acquisition of lands at the Highway 404. So we had a start and a stop at that time of this. And so really what this is the 404, Highway 404. These funds would most appropriately be returned to as uncommitted to the reserve, and that Mr. Ramuno, we work towards a new capital budget and for that we're working on for this year. So a new sheet, if we don't already have one. I don't believe we have one in that area at this point in time. The final one is the Queensville Town Centre urban design, and this is an interesting one again that was put in at the time. Council wanted a full review of the town centre, and discussions with the property owners at that time thought it was premature, and that they wanted to work towards getting more of the development built. So now we have phase 1 built. Phase 2 is as we know, is being marketed. One of the Council approved the design for the Queensville Healthy Active Living Plaza, and I think in that report it was clear that discussions and working with the private interests on how how our facility would integrate with the town center is very important. And again, I think we might want to take a look at that to scope it, to at least make sure that the integration with our proposed facility is looked at as a priority with the private interests. So the reason we wanted to speak to this one, there's a lot of extensive and expensive projects here, and we think that the ones that where we haven't taken a lot of action on, it would be helpful to rebudget, rescope, and have this council put the
Will we just keep going down the list
So
for each?
that's it for me, Madam Mayor. I'll pass it back to our finance.
Pardon me. Madam Mayor, at this point, if you'd like, perhaps we could just go department by department and just go, but we're on page 3, so rather than flipping back and forth, perhaps complete page 3, and then we'll go to 1 and 2, if that's okay. So emergency and community safety services, perhaps just then we'll ask, can we have the chart distributed? Do we have the extra chart there? So we're on page 3 of 3. I don't mind I'll go to corporate services first, maybe just to give Deputy a couple of moments just to look at that, familiarize himself with the listing. We have 4 items on here. The DC study update, that's really a provision that we may or may not need. We've been very successful the last a couple of development charge bylaw updates to have done them successfully with no outside consulting support and no appeals. We do have a small provision there in the event that we would require some outside assistance, but quite frankly, we're hoping that the expenditure, when we're finished the process, really just a provisional item. The other 3 are quite dated. They came out of formerly when this function was part of the planning department. One of them was a community improvement program, grant program, and there was a provision of $10,000 to explore some community improvement program grants that we might provide to help move along with sort of development of business areas and so on. That's something that I think we need to revisit, and that project either eliminated at this point in time or updated. I'm going to say you may want to we'll have to determine, but this project stems back to a point in time when York University was actively looking for a location to place its next campus, and there was a budget established for that attraction process for East Gwillimbury to participate. You can see that there was some funds spent, but not nearly close to the entire budget. At this point, staff are not actively pursuing that project. So again, that's one that we may need to talk about and assess what, if any, effort should be going on right now, and whether there should be funds committed at this point, or whether we should be coming back at a more strategic point in time with a I would suggest that we take a look at this one, consider keeping part or all of this, especially in light of some of the comments this morning from Councillor Carruthers, and looking at whether we reprofile this to look at expanded downtown revitalization support. So again, in all of those cases, those three cases, to the degree that they stay, I think that the capital budget sheet should be updated, and they should be reviewed by council in a current context and perhaps reapproved.
Any questions? Councillor Carruthers?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, the downtown revitalization, thank you for bringing that up. I noticed a number of comments been sitting there since 2012, and the residents have been chomping at the bit for something to happen on this. So I would hope that, you know, given that it was identified quite a number of years ago, we can get going on something soon. Thank you.
Mr. Webster?
Madam Mayor, just, it might be helpful, these are, some of these ones, especially post-secondary and they're very dated. Like now we're into year 7 of, would council like us to rescope an initiative on these as to what it might be? Like, it's nice to carry post-secondary attraction, but as administrator, there's no direction at all. It's like we're just having a reserve encumbered, and so I guess what we'll need to know is it a priority? Do we want to the reserve? I think that was sort of, to clean this list up a bit, might be a worthwhile discussion to have.
I guess my question would be to staff. Today or tomorrow, we don't seem to have anything from post-secondary. However, if 2 months from now, somebody comes and knocks on our door, and they're in a position to at least start to assess and perhaps investigate the possibilities, where do we stand financially at that point? Go ahead, please.
Madam Mayor, so because this is capital funded and it's coming out of our primarily growth-related reserves, in front of council, discussing with you the opportunity at hand, and at that point, perhaps seeking some in-year direction and support to move forward. And if there was a budget requirement, there may not be a budget requirement in simply exploratory discussions and some initial conversation about opportunities and potential. But if it got beyond that, where we needed significant additional resources to create materials or to participate in a way that would actually require outside support of some form that required a budget, then we could easily come back to you at that time and in pretty short order make an in-year capital request. So I do believe there's a mechanism to deal with that, even if there's not an outstanding. We've got a fairly large amount that's been sitting here for some time, and perhaps if you did want to leave an amount outstanding, maybe staff could come back and at least scope that down a little bit so it provides a more moderate amount that we might need if we had to act quickly.
I guess the one part of it is the dollars. The other part of it is the projects themselves. They had merit, whether it was 2011, there might even be a 2010 here. And does it have merit? Does it speak to the goals and objectives of this council? And I think that they're two very different things. It's almost like having an opportunity to have a workshop at some point talking about this secondary school. So does that take it?
That's okay. That's the third handout that you have. And then the only thing that really is left, if you wish to go through it today, is the sheets that we have there on new staff, if there's a desire to go through and talk about those as well. But there's we're the bulk of the way through at this point. So if I can, I'm now referring to the document entitled Estimate of 2018 Uncommitted Reserves and Reserve Fund Balances. So just to let you know, this was organized a few years ago into categories to try and make it a little easier to cluster these and understand what the purpose is of these reserves. The working capital reserve is really an operating reserve that we would have in the event that we have unforeseen or time-specific operating pressures to assist with. And then you can see under program related, there's a number of them there. Just the one that I do want to point out, a couple of them, the winter operations, what we do try and do with winter operations, because it really fluctuates depending on weather patterns each year and so on, that to the degree that we may have extra money in the winter ops budget in a given year, we'd put money into the reserve. In a year where winter conditions warranted additional service, we would draw from the reserve. So it's intended to provide a little bit of a smoothing effect over time. Farmers Market is really something we assist that group in terms of managing or sort of maintaining some of the funds that are used and generated through the Farmers Market. And then we have some capital asset renewal and replacement reserves, and those are reserves that come from generally tax or it could be sources other than growth, other than development-related fees. And you can see in there, there's the one that's the library reserve, and that's one, again, that we maintain here, but the library accesses and uses through request to council. And I think there was a request this morning for accessing the library reserve. And so you can see that amount there. And just to let you know, this schedule, if you go over to the far column uncommitted fund balance, I'll just look for a nod to make sure I'm correct in this, but it should already incorporate all of the projects that are before you and proposed. So should you approve the entire capital program in its current form, these would be the projected balances. Should you reduce the capital program, these balances go up, and should you add to the capital program, those balances could potentially go down. So that's just to put that into perspective. The development and fee supported category at the bottom, just to note that you'll recall from that section of the budget, we had a separate tab for that, and there were 5 areas that were budgeted in the development and fee supported budget, and this is the place that those funds come into. So as we collect development related fees, they go into these reserve funds. As those operations are carried on, those reserve funds are used to fund those operations. You may find in a given year that our operational costs exceed fees coming in the door. You may have another year where fees coming in the door exceed operational costs, and so those reserve amounts will fluctuate. But our goal always is to ensure that they are sustainable over time. I can tell you that going back several years ago, around 2010 timeframe, we had some pretty significant shortfall positions in our development fee related reserves. We undertook some significant work internally to reassess fees and cost structures and so on, and I am personally very pleased with how those reserve funds have turned around in that period of time. Then you go on to page 2, there's development, water and waste water rate funded reserves.